Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. Today we have got another amazing video for you. This time, we are going to talk about the war that started an era of civil war in Japan. The start of the war marked an end to the feudal system of Japan under the Ashikaga Shogunate. So, let's take a closer look at this war of succession and how it remade the structure of Japan. Without further ado, let us begin. The Onin conflict began as controversy over the succession of Shogun Ashikaga Yoshimasa. In 1462, Yoshimasa had no heir. He persuaded his younger brother Ashikaga Yoshimi to abandon his lifestyle as a monk and come and rule the kingdom. His brother agreed, and he was promptly named as an heir. However, all these plans were disrupted when in 1465, Yoshimasa was blessed with a son, Yoshihisa. This created a succession crisis with two competing factions. On one side was the shogun and his brother, together with the shogun's deputy, while on the other side was Yoshihisa's mother, Hino Tomiko, and her ally Yamana, who was the governor of several provinces. Tomiko sought political and military support to rule as regents until her son was old enough to rule. She secured the support of Yamana Sōzen and the other leaders of powerful samurai clans. In contrast to Tomiko and Yamana, Yoshimi had the support of the powerful Hosokawa clan. This clan had a lot of influence on the shogunate court. Hosokawa had always worked closely with the shogun brother Ashikaga Yoshimi and supported his claim to the shogunate. Yamana took this dispute as an opportunity to check the growing power of the Hosokawa and began supporting the child as an heir to the shogunate. Soon, war broke out in the city of Kyoto. This was regarded as an act of rebellion by the Ashikaga shogun, and thus he and his followers were forced to go to war to stop the conflict. Hosokawa's eastern army of about 85,000 men was almost evenly matched with Yamana's army of 80,000 men. Both of these forces were marshaled near Kyoto. Finally, fighting started in March when Hosokawa Mansion was attacked and burned to the ground. Following this attack, a Yamana mansion was attacked in May 1467. In July, Hosokawa was appointed as a commanding general by Yoshimasa to teach a lesson to the rebel army of Yamana. The fighting between the forces only intensified with time, and throughout July, hundreds of buildings were destroyed, and the situation continued, and the situation soon worsened. Hosokawa was finally cornered in the northeast portion of Kyoto, around his mansion, while the south and the west were controlled by Yamana. Soon after, Yamana received 20,000 reinforcements under Uchi Masahiro in September. Despite the odds now stacked against him, Hosokawa was able to retrieve the now abdicated but still sovereign Emperor Tabakufu from his palace before Yamana seized it with 50,000 men. With the emperor not at his side, Hosokawa soon received Akamatsu troops as reinforcements. On 1st November, Yamana was able to capture Shokoku-ji, a large Buddhist temple, after he bribed a monk. The battle in the temple was horrendous as both sides cut each other down. After Yamana's victory at the temple, both forces entered a span of supposed ceasefire where each side stood its ground, not willing to move. Hosokawa did try to mount a surprise attack on New Year's Day and then again in April the next year, but both attempts bore no results and the stood sides continued their stare-off. A trench was dug between the two forces. It was 10 feet deep and 20 feet apart. During this time, several monasteries, including the Tenryuji, were burned. Finally, the stalemate broke when Yoshimi went to the side of Yamana, a move that forced the shogun to name his son as heir in 1469. In this strange turn of allegiances, the battle turned from a war of succession to a conflict between brothers, as soon the Emperor Go-Tsuchimikado stripped Yoshimi of his court ranks and declared him a rebel. In 1473, both Yamana and Hosokawa Katsumoto died, but when the death of the two main commanders wasn't enough to end the war, as neither side was unwilling to relent. However, eventually, the Yamana clan relented as the title of rebel started to take its toll. The Japanese were an honorable lot, and such titles only brought dishonor to the family. As a result, Oichi Masahiro, one of the Yamana generals, burnt down his section of Kyoto and left the area on 17 December 1477. By this time, Kyoto was just a shadow of its former glory. It was nothing more than a place for mobs to loot and move in to take what was left. Both the Yamana clan and the Hosokawa clan had failed to achieve their purpose and had only successfully reduced the numbers of the opposing clan. Throughout this time, the shogun was of no use. While Kyoto was burning, he was busy reading poetry and other cultural activities. He was even planning on building Ginkakuji, a silver pavilion that would rival Kinkakuji, the golden pavilion that had been built by his grandfather, Ashikaga Yoshimitsu. The Onin War and the shogun's complacent attitude towards it sanctioned the spread of private wars and skirmishes as other daimyo picked the opportunity to either increase their power or settle old scores. The war was winding down in Kyoto, but it had now spread to other parts of Japan. In Yamashiro province, the Hatakeyama clan split, and the two went to war with each other. However, neither was able to beat the other and fought to a standstill. However, this would prove to be even more devastating. In 1485, the peasants and the Jizumarai, lesser samurai, banded together and revolted against the Hatakeyama clan. They set up their own powerful army and forced the Hatakeyama to leave the province. The Ikki, name of the peasant army, grew more and more professional, and by 1486, they had even set up a rival government for the Yamashiro province. The Ikki would later go on to form and reappear in other parts of Japan as well. One such location was the Kaga province, where a sect of the Jodo Shinshu Buddhists, the Ikko, started their own revolt during the Onin War after being enlisted by one of Kagu's most prominent warlords, Togashi Masachika. The Ikko had a complex relationship with the Jodo Shinshu leader Renyo, appealed to the common peasants in their region, and formed the Ikko Ikki. By 1448, the Ikko Ikki of Kaga province overthrew Masachika and took control of the province. After removing Masachika, they began building a fortified cathedral castle along the Yodo River, which was to serve as their headquarters. The uprising of the Ikko Ikki and the Yamashiro Ikki formed part of the general outbreak of civil war, and some refer to it as Gekkokujo, the low oppresses the high, or a disturbed social order. These frequent uprisings of the 15th century were expressions of popular discontent in which the peasants took their part. After the Onin War, the Ashikaga Bakufu completely fell apart. The Hosokawa family was in charge, and the Ashikaga shoguns became their puppets. When Yoshimi's son Yoshitane was made shogun in 1490, the Hosokawa Kanrei soon put him to fight in 1493 and declared another Ashikaga, Yoshizumi, to be shogun. In 1499, Yoshitane arrived at Yamauchi, the capital of Ouchi, and this powerful military family threw its might behind Yoshitane. In 1507, the Kanrei Hosokawa Masamoto was assassinated, and in 1508, Yoshizumi left Kyoto and the Ouchi restored the shogunate to Yoshitane. Once again, a series of strange conflicts began to take control of the puppet government of the shogunate. After the death of Hosokawa Matsumoto, his adopted sons, Takouni and Sumimoto, began to fight over the succession to the Kanrei, but Sumimoto himself was a puppet of one of his vassals. The wars following the Onin War were more about control over puppet governments than they were about high ideals or simply greed for territory. The Hosokawa family controlled the shogunate until 1558, when they were betrayed by a vassal family, the Miyoshi. The powerful Ouchi was also destroyed by a vassal, Mori Montanari, in 1551. After the Ōnin War, the authority of independent local leaders grew dramatically, and deputies of major shugo houses took their superiors' territories, retainers toppled their overlords, and branch families gained control from main families in numerous cases. The preceding shugo basically completely vanished from Kyoto as a result of this tendency for inferiors to conquer superiors, Gekkokuji. The old shugo nearly totally vanished from Kyoto and the neighboring provinces and were replaced by a new sort of domain ruler, the daimyo. The Sengoku, Warring States era, was named after a comparable period in Chinese history because it was characterized by continuous conflict among numerous such rulers. Until the first part of the 16th century, daimyo in various locales built up powerful military strongholds in this manner. During this time, the daimyo's provinces were nearly totally free of bakufu authority. Local leaders were transformed into retainers by their daimyo, who took away their freedom by imposing land surveys and exerting direct control over farming settlements. To manage their own regions, the daimyos, like the Imagawa, Date, and Ouchi, created their own laws known as Bonkuko-ho. While relying on the example of the J Formulary's warrior rules, these provincial laws also contained regulations for farmers and stringent controls over retainers. In farming communities, the daimyo not only conducted comprehensive land surveys, but also constructed irrigation dikes and planted additional rice fields to boost productivity. They restructured highways and post stations to center on their castle cities, rearranged the arrangement of small fortified strongholds, and collected their retainers into castles to consolidate their authority. Uji Yamada Sakamoto and other towns sprung up outside the gates of important temples and shrines about the same period as Kyoto and Nara. Apart from them, towns such as Naoetsu of the Uesegi family, Yamaguchi of the Uchi family, Ichidani of the Asakura family, and Odawara of the later Hojo developed around those naturally, around the castles of the daimyo. Markets were established outside the castle walls, where the castles transitioned from defensive mountain fortresses to administrative strongholds on the plains, and merchants and artisans came to reside there. At this point in Japan's history, commerce in towns saw significant growth. Periodic markets have also sprouted up all across the country. Despite customs restrictions imposed by both bakufu and commercial interests, goods from all across the country were available in these marketplaces. By the end of the Warring States period, only a dozen or so warlord families remained. The most important development as a result of the Ōnin War was the ceaseless civil war that ignited outside the capital city. Hosokawa tried to ignite civil strife in the Ouchi domains, and this civil strife would eventually force Ouchi to submit and leave. At the end of the war, this type of civil war, characterized by either vassals striving to conquer the daimyo or succession disputes, began to occur periodically all over Japan. The cost of the war for an individual daimyo was immense, and a century of conflicts weakened the bulk of Japanese warlords that the three great figures of Japanese unification, beginning with Oda Nobunaga, found it easier to militarily assert a single unified military government later in the future. As the city of Kyoto was devastated by the war, the city never really recovered until the mid-16th century. The destruction was so extensive that the city has not seen since the same left of the disaster. In Kyoto, pre-war refers to the pre-war rather than World War II. Another consequence of the war was the arrival of the English. Neither the emperor nor the shogun was able to rule the home scene, let alone oversee international trade, as the warring daimyo carved out their territories. In addition, Japanese marauders working with Chinese pirates resurfaced. The arrival of the Spanish and Portuguese in the archipelago coincided with this period in Japanese history. Several Portuguese ships were shipwrecked on the island of Tanega, off the coast of southern Kyushu in 1543. These were the first Europeans to come to Japan, and the musket-making skills they passed down quickly spread to Sakai and other locations. The daimyo enthusiastically sought this new technology, which transformed Japanese combat. So that's all the time we have today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to view more of our amazing videos. Oh,